the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
People trapped in elevators and buildings, they have activated the emergency command center.
You're staggering, trying to take in as much information as you can.
Mayor Bloomberg's advice is to go straight home.
The subway system is down.
Ottawa is completely without power now.
The lightning-quick domino series of failures.
Gotta go to the bathroom and you can't even go nowhere.
50 million people are thought to have lost power.
In 2003, a massive blackout struck major areas of the U.S. and Canada and was perceived as a wake-up call for the nation.
We've got a real crisis in our grid, and this is why, despite being a superpower, we have a grid that is comparable to a third world country, and that's not right.
I don't think you can ever say with 100% confidence we won't have a blackout.
Just the past 8 months, federal authorities have issued several public warnings about foreign hackers penetrating the United States power grid and other critical infrastructure. Cybersecurity experts say the intent is to plant digital grenades in these systems until they decide to pull the pin.
Right now we're tracking around 8 different teams that specifically target industrial networks.
Robert Lee spent 5 years working at the National Security Agency and Pentagon Cyber Command before forming his own company called Dragos. Lee and his crew protect industrial control systems by acting like detectives investigating a crime scene.
They're leaving breadcrumbs the entire way through, so they're giving us pieces to go and find those behaviors until they get to that impact.
Working from a warehouse in Hanover, Maryland, Dragos track foreign hacking groups in real time, then hunt them down to prevent damage to facilities that produce oil, gas, and other energy.
We've seen that these are not theoretical attacks. And my team was actually involved in the 2 different Ukraine attacks that happened, so the Ukraine 2015 and Ukraine 2016. A national level adversary compromised portions of their power grid and did exactly that. We're able to turn off the lights in those regions.
Now Lee says these cyber enemies are going way beyond controlling just light switches.
But now we're starting to see really aggressive behavior on, well, I'm going to design a capability to kill people outside of conflict, outside of war, to target civilian life.
And an attack on the United States would create casualties on a massive scale. Research shows a cyber attack on the power grid killing electricity would potentially leave millions of Americans without food, clean water, access to money, health care, and more.
Frankly, the United States is under attack by entities that are using cyber to penetrate virtually every major action that takes place in the United States.
The director of national intelligence recently told Congress that cyber weapons exist in the hands of not only countries but also terrorists and other activists.
While Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea pose the greatest cyber threats, other nation states, terrorist organizations, transnational criminal organizations, and ever more technically capable groups and individuals use cyber operations to achieve strategic and malign objectives.
This isn't a sideshow. You know, this is the way, the primary way our enemies would come after us in a future war. Cyber, physical sabotage, and nuclear EMP attack.
Dr. Peter Pry worked on the U.S. Commission assessing the threat of an electromagnetic EMP attack, which would wipe out electrical systems. As an example, he says a country like North Korea could target the United States by transporting a nuclear weapon over the South Polar region, then detonating it to create a high-altitude EMP. A congressional report shows such an attack could wipe out the power grid indefinitely. That could lead to the deaths of up to 90% of all Americans within a year. So how much would it cost to secure our power grid? In 2008, an EMP commission estimated it would cost around $2 billion. But former CIA Director James Woolsey says today's amount to strengthen the grid would likely be in the tens of billions. But Dr. Pry says the D.C. bureaucracy and political influence prevent that from happening.
The electric power industry doesn't want to do it. They have vast lobbying resources on K Street. They own basically the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which recently defied Secretary of Energy Perry in his effort to come up with a more secure grid. They actually defied the Secretary of Energy.
Another major issue, while larger utilities have beefed up cyber defense, smaller regional companies often overlook the need for such security.
anywhere between 80 and 90% of the critical infrastructure in this country is held in private hands. And so, other than the regulators, there's no real control over doing the things that you need to do, the basic blocking and tackling of cyber hygiene and so forth.
Since our critical infrastructures depend on each other, Homeland Security holds exercises like Cyberstorm 6. It simulates various cyber attacks simultaneously on a variety of facilities, forcing federal, state, and local agencies to work with private companies to quickly find solutions.
The ability to exercise how we coordinate, how we collaborate, how we share information, because that is just as important, as we've seen in every real-life incident, as the actual technical means of identifying who's doing it and getting them off the computers.
Bottom line, enemies big and small want to plant cyber sleeper weapons within our infrastructure so they can eventually use them to destroy our way of life. The challenge will be ensuring a full team effort between both the U.S. government and private enterprise to fully protect us.
Electricity is really far more important than anyone realizes. We take it for granted, we flick the switch and it goes on, but it has to be in balance or the lights go out.
There has been a massive power outage throughout much of the Northeast, both of the United States and of Canada.
Millions and millions of people were caught by surprise when the electrical grid suddenly crashed.
It shut down 100 power plants, from Ottawa down to Cleveland and as far east as New York.
The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
The attacks of 9/11 were pretty fresh in everybody's mind, and the first thought on almost every New Yorker that I spoke to's mind was, is this terrorism?
The police are saying that the evacuation procedures are working, people are calm, and that they are getting out.
A normal August afternoon had turned to crisis. Around 50 million people across the U.S. and Canada were left without power.
All of Cleveland's water supply runs on electric pumps.
My water commissioner said, the people in the Heights have water for 3 hours. I said, water? I thought the electric was out. He said, Mayor, how do you think the water gets from the lake to the people in the Heights?
You can get along in the dark, you can get along in the heat, but water becomes a health and safety issue very quickly.
While terrorism was soon ruled out, there was a frenzied search to unravel the mystery behind the source of the blackout.
We don't know yet what went wrong, but we will.
What we're hearing on the radios is that there was some sort of incident in Ontario, Canada.
There was a lot of finger pointing.
U.S. officials initially accused a mishap at a Canadian utility plant. The mayor of Toronto fired back.
Tell me, have you ever seen the United States take blame for anything?
It took 29 hours for the power to be turned back on in most major cities, but the brief outage contributed to at least 11 deaths and caused an estimated $6 billion in economic losses.
We were fortunate that the grid stayed up as it did and it didn't continue cascading any further.
Engineers spent months unraveling the cause of the blackout and traced it not to New York or Canada, but to a downed power line in Ohio.
The theory was it was a tree in suburban Cleveland. And we were like, what?
The official report later found it was a series of human and operational failures that set the blackout in motion. A downed power line went unnoticed because the alarm system failed at the local power company, First Energy, and soon other lines were overloaded.
When the line overheated, it sagged. And as it sagged, it hit a tree that shouldn't have been in the right-of-way corridor.
Meanwhile, at the regional service operator, Midwest ISO, an employee had gone to lunch and forgot to turn back on the tool that monitored grid problems.
As the grid in Ohio got less and less stable, with too much voltage over too few lines, power plants began to turn off. And eventually it cascaded around the Lake Erie Loop and all the way to New York.
Investigators said today this nation's worst power blackout was mostly the fault of the First Energy Corporation of Akron, Ohio.
First Energy was busy trying to grow, trying to absorb other companies. And the report found that they had let many basic things go. That included tree trimming under these power lines. Their computers hadn't been upgraded. But there was more than that.